that I have a large amount of information to share in a short amount of time, but I'm going to speed through this as fast as I can, so please take note of any questions you might have. Just kind of going to provide an upstream overview for everyone here. So, yeah, without further ado. Okay, so this is going to be kind of my outline. I'm going to kind of cover hydraulic fracturing a little bit. Provide a local overview of what's happening in San Luis Basin here, and I guess you can read this so I don't need to tell you what is all going on. So here's a state of the picture of Colorado and different basins in case people aren't familiar. The largest basin in Colorado is the DJ Basin. This is covers the northeastern part of Colorado and extends down to Denver all the way down to Colorado Springs. And right now we're located in San Luis Basin, which is here. It's right here, and then much of the production that's happening down this part of the state is in the Raton Basin, where there's a lot of coal bed methane wells. So, and those should not really be kind of confused with shale wells. They're quite different. Here is a map from the CFCC that kind of shows some of the, at least the wells around San Luis Basin. And if you squint really hard, you can see a few dots, which each one of those represent a well. And all told, there are less than 100 wells in San Luis Basin, and a lot of them are quite old too. Anywhere spanning anywhere from the 1920s to I think recently there was a wildcat well drilled out in 2011 just south of Presto. But not much development happening right now in San Luis Basin. So I'm going to kind of cover the fundamentals of hydraulic fracturing. So in case, fortunately, they have the video shown, so I don't need to really describe the process. Essentially, what hydraulic fracturing is injecting water and a small amount of chemicals and proppant, typically sand, down into the source rock from which you're going to extract the minerals from. And then that creates fractures, and then the sand keeps those fractures open and increases flow of whatever resource it is, whether it be oil or gas. And the reason why it's really needed for these companies to go in is because, well, I'll illustrate in just a moment, but it really does increase the rate of which you get these resources back and makes it economic to be in these regions. So here's kind of a slide, a little bit more technical. On the left you have a vertical well. It shows about, I think, 160 square feet of exposure to your source rock. And then if you run it laterally in a horizontal fashion, then you get about 20 times the exposure. And this is without fracking. And if you frack, this is the far right picture, you get almost about 1,000 times your exposure. So I mean, this is the reason why companies frack. So, I'd like to point out also that fracking is not a new technology. It's been used since the late 1940s. Commercially, Halliburton used it in 1949. And since then, it's been vastly proven. I think even right now, Halliburton has developed a green frac fluid, which is kind of composed of all food ingredients. So he drank it on the stage at one of our presentations. It was kind of shocking. So and then this is the EIA's graph, the Energy Information Administration, which kind of provides broad overviews of and in-depth analysis of the energy picture within the United States and also partly worldwide too. But what you're looking at here is the natural gas supply domestically in the United States. So the top line, I guess you could say, or spread of blue is the shale gas situation and kind of ratio. As you can see, as you extend out to 2030, shale gas is really, at least so the EIA has projected, going to be the game changer and where a large amount of natural gas is going to come from. So, hydraulic fracturing. Can I get kind of like a show of hands of who has heard about it before this
Kind of form. All right, so just almost everybody. Can I also get a show of hands of who has seen Gasland or Split Estate or any of that? All right, great. So one of my jobs when I was employed through the Colorado Oil and Gas Association is kind of dispelling a lot of misperceptions and facts that groups and organizations put out there. So as you can see, if you even Google fracking, this is what you're going to turn up in Google Images and Google searches. And yeah, it does not paint a pretty picture for the industry. However, what my line of work has kind of shown is that a lot of it is kind of spun. Information really is generated for a purpose, and whether it be anti-industry or pro-industry, it's generated for a purpose. However, I like to point out that industry is an industrial process. So, and with any industrial process, you're going to have accidents. We're not immune to it. No industry is immune to it. However, I also like to point out that it is a highly engineered and managed by science. So to speak, and it is constantly improving. Okay, we can get time. So. Next on to drilling. So, because before you can hydraulic fracture, well, you got to drill it. And also I'd like to point out that none of my slides are going to point out any economic benefit. You guys can go to our website, and I didn't think you really guys wanted to hear about all the jobs and stuff that I can provide. I was just kind of here to provide more of the technical nature since I am a research analyst. But I do research the numbers of economic stuff as well. Anywho, so drilling and depth-wise, when you drill a typical shale well in Colorado, which is looking to be what San Luis Basin might have, you're drilling down to a depth of about 7,000 feet. And so there's a very common misperception that when you frack a well, these chemicals are going to come back up through the source rock and pervade your groundwater drinking supply. And that's just not true. So I'll discuss some of the potential contamination issues and where they lie, but it's certainly not going to migrate through 7,000 feet of rock. If you can picture a skyscraper, here illustrated is the Wells Fargo cash register building downtown. So if you're like looking up at the skyscraper, that's 700 feet. If you stack about another 9 on top of that, that's how deep down they're drilling and inserting these the frac fluid. So there's no upward migration, and they can actually map out where these where the frac propagates to through use of microseismic. So essentially, they stick a geophone in the ground, and then once the frac happens, they can see where the fracs go, and then they stay within the source rock. So, with drilling, probably the most important aspect that people should know here is casing and cementing. So with drilling, there's multiple levels of casing and cementing. Some of the probably two of the most important ones are going to be your surface casing, especially the surface casing, which in Colorado is required to go at least 50 feet below any drinking water sources. And then after each phase of drilling, they'll case it, and then they'll cement it, and then they'll pressure test it. So that way they know that there's no leaks. And they'll continue drilling, case it, cement it, pressure test it. So it's just the process in which things are done. The second one's the production casing. So each of these are, when I say casing, it's steel casing. It's not like flimsy thing. It's steel. It's heavy. And these are two of the main casings that are required in oil and gas drilling. However, many operators amongst the state use additional casings as well, such as intermediate casing, and then later cement and pressure testing. So typically, if you have any contamination within your aquifer, and it's from, like, whether it be methane or fracking, if COGCC, which is the regulating body for the state, finds that as the operator's fault, most times than not, it's going to be a casing and cementing issue. It's not a fracking issue. So, I've already kind of covered fracking, but I just wanted to go over the chemicals involved, which I'm sure some of you know. But I know Gasland kind of illustrated there are about 512 chemicals used in fracturing. And really, for each frac job, there's only about 10 to 12 chemicals used. And I'll talk about disclosure in a bit. I got a lot of stuff. But some of the reasons why chemicals are used, I get asked often, from my friends, from my family, well, why do they need to use chemicals? Why can't they use water or sand? Well, it's a scientific process, and stuff needs to be done most efficiently. So when they send down some of the chemicals, some of them have different purposes. Some of them, allow the proppant to flow better into these fractures and fissures. Others will regulate the pH. Some will even prevent bacteria from building up that would, kind of provide issues with the steel casing and could degrade it if that happens. So, unfortunately, chemicals are needed. And where horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing kind of meet and provide, a benefit for the driller and also for the surface owner is the reduced footprint. So here's kind of illustrated on a 1280 acre spacing. You have about 32 wells would cover that, will cover the source rock exposure to it, whereas one well pad could essentially do that job as well. So reduced footprint's a big plus. So produced water. I don't know how many people know the difference between produced water and flowback water are here, but they're two very different things that oftentimes get mistaken for each other. So flowback water is the water that comes back out of the well from the hydraulic fracturing process. And typically most of it is captured in operations. And produced water is water that just is already in that formation, right? People don't commonly think that, oh, there's water in rocks. There is. And when you fracture it, water will come back through the life of the well. So there is some point where produced water or flowback water turns into produced water, but they're two very distinct things initially. So in Colorado, I took this statistic from Director Neslin that said essentially about 60% of the waters that comes back as produced water is disposed of through underground injection wells. And you don't have too much of that down here, to be honest with you. You have some of it, but with your CBM wells, coal bed methane, which is in the Raton Basin from that previous slide, most of it's going to be surface discharged. So you have about 75% surface discharge into streams, very little actually into dirt roads. But when they do discharge it into streams and surface waters, they have to get a permit. It's a pretty robust permit from the Colorado Department of Public Safety through the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and they have to meet certain standards, and they have constant water monitoring of all the watersheds down here in the Purgatoire, for example, which we'll cover later. But here are just some of the regulations involving just waste disposal, and these are all on the CHCC's website. I encourage you to visit that website if you're having an inquiring mind about that. So, the amount of water is very heated discussion. Some people say that there's a large amount of water used in hydraulic fracturing. And yes, it is a large volume, but on the big picture of things, it really does not scale. So for example, in the Raton Basin here, you have, well, out east, you have a fairly small amount of water being used for each well, because so much water, because the wells are shallower and you don't need as much water to stimulate it. So shale wells take more water, about 4.7 million gallons in a typical horizontal well out in the Niobrara, which is the DJ Basin. But I will also discuss with you that when you look at Colorado's water use, it is very minimal. So here's Colorado's water use, a snapshot of it. And as you can see, on a daily basis, 13.5 billion gallons are used on a daily basis in Colorado. And of that, 142 million, so about 1%, is used for industrial purposes. And that's all industrial purposes, not just hydraulic fracturing. So it's less than 1%. I think I computed it actually, and it came out to about, I want to say 0.1%, so if that. And on a yearly basis, you have about 5 trillion gallons used each year. So, and normally when an operator acquires water for use of hydraulic fracturing is from, at least in the DJ Basin, which is where most prominent drilling happens, is from the city, who's very willing to sell their water. They can acquire from private landowners that also are willing to sell it or lease their water rights out to them as well. And so it's really, so far we have not seen water shortages in Colorado. This slide kind of illustrates the water requirements for power usage in natural gas. So, you know, everybody says, well, using a lot of water to get out this natural gas. And when you look at it on the broad picture compared to other energy forms, this document is put out by the GWPC, it's the Groundwater Protection Council, which is a state-led organization that kind of studies water use and natural gas development. I don't know if you can read it, but at the top is deep shale natural gas, which can be some of the lowest water usage around, and then it's kind of comparable to coal, to be honest with you. But of course, as you get down the line with biofuels, it just, I guess, is much less. So what's a conversation about oil and gas without a little regulation? So I'll kind of speed through this because it's a little dry. But I'd like to point out that in Colorado, the COGCC has not found a single instance of hydraulic fracturing contaminating groundwater. Now let me be specific about this. Hydraulic fracturing defined here, as I talked about before, is injecting water in the ground, and they have not found that contaminates water. Sure, there have been instances of casing failures, of cementing issues that will lead to contamination. However, hydraulic fracturing is not the culprit here. It is shoddy well completion, shoddy well structures, and some spills as well, but those are a different matter. So, here's also another list, small list of some of the important regulations. I'd like to point out that, I'll only take a couple here. The CBM baseline water sampling, Rule 341, is a required rule from the COGCC that they have logged over 2,000 wells for all CBM wells in Colorado that require baseline sampling. I believe, Mr. Estrella kind of illustrated that well. What baseline sampling is they go in pre-drilling and post-drilling and take samples of your water. And he's given you kind of a good outline of what to look for, what to test for. And in the Raton Basin, or any CBM well, the COGC requires that be done for a 5-year timeline. Braden head monitoring is the other important one I wanted to point out. That's all wells need to be pressure tested. And then companies will know if there's a loss in pressure through monitoring systems. And then with that loss in pressure, they know that there's a wellbore integrity issue, in which case they can shut down the well. They can address any remediation concerns almost, well, I don't say immediately, but in a very timely fashion. So that's just more brain head and CBM. All right, so I also like to illustrate that COGA has implemented a baseline water sampling program, a voluntary one, but I'd like to point out there's about 90% participation currently statewide. And this is a voluntary program for operators among statewide, not just CBM wells at all. And it actually is more robust than CHCC's current program for CBM wells. And, operators, we live and breathe in these communities too, and we want to increase transparency and accountability upon our operations. So this is just one of the ways to, provide that for the public. So, and it's so what is a half-mile radius around the surface pad, and well, you guys can read. So yeah, you guys can look forward to that in the beginning of November. So. All right, and then lastly, well, almost nearly lastly, is the hydraulic fracturing disclosure registry. So this hydraulic fracturing disclosure has been such a heated topic, and the GWPC, in conjunction with the IOGCC, which is the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, which is another state-run organization, has put together this website called fracfocus.org, and I strongly encourage anyone and everyone to look at it and explore the site. Essentially what it is just about all major operators have signed on to provide well information on this. So what it is essentially you're providing information on how deep the well is, what's going into the well chemical-wise, their CAS numbers, who they got it from, and they just recently revamped the site to be able to be searchable on a location basis. So I've taken the liberty here, blown up. The San Luis Basin is off to the left. There's no wells logged because there's not really much development out here at all. But the Raton Basin, you see about 68 wells logged, which is pretty good. It's going from January 1st and on of this year. But operators have been rolling back into their drilling plans, including stuff in 2010 as well. So I think last year, this year, about 10 wells have been drilled in Raton, and about last year, 50 wells have been drilled. So right now, 68 are logged. So and here's kind of like a more of a snapshot, blowing up the Raton Basin. You see all these little blue dots that, and you can click on each one. You can open up a PDF file that will provide all this information: location, operator who's supplying it, CAS numbers, and chemical constituents. So, and then lastly is the resource section. Here's a good website that I ran across earlier this year that details a little more education about the Raton Basin as far as hydraulic fracturing, water use, produced water, and then I can also give you guys these materials later. And the Purgatory Watershed, Tetra Tech, in conjunction with Pioneer, has put up this website of real-time monitoring of the Purgatory Watershed, since there is a lot of surface discharge here. So you can take these measurements from this website and see it on a real-time basis. So, and I strongly encourage, I'm out of time, but I strongly encourage you guys to visit our website. One of our missions is to maintain an air of absolute transparency and unbiased information. And I think so far we've done a pretty good job of that this year. Not to toot my own horn, but anyways, I strongly encourage you to go to our website to look up these educational materials. And we'll save questions for the panel. Thank you very much.